So it is my honor and privilege to welcome Ken White, and I know that you will find him to be a wonderful, inspirational speaker. Ken?
Well, thank you, Pam, and thank you, everybody, for having me to this incredible island. I was listening to Pam, and two quick thoughts before I get to my formal comments. One, I too was turned down for adoption while I was vice president of the Humane Society of the United States by one of the shelters in Maryland for not having a fenced yard. Well, that was interesting. It, of course, was the middle of winter, and fencing a yard was impossible. You all heard of winter. It's when it gets really cold. Another word you probably heard of is cold. And then thinking of your 22, 23 years in this field, I'm in my 35th year, and as I joked with some new friends earlier, I feel like I was 6'3" and blonde when I started this work, because it can wear you down, but God love you all for doing it and for staying in it. So among the many hats I get to wear for my organization is I blog for the Huffington Post and SanFranciscoGate.com, and there my bio starts with the comment that I was raised by alligators dropped in the sewers of Brooklyn by the returning elderly Jewish grandparents coming back from Miami. Not completely true, surprisingly. I was in fact raised in Brooklyn in the 1950s and 60s, lower middle class Jewish family where four of us shared a one-bedroom, one-bath apartment, kind of a backstory for the Seinfelds kind of thing. No sentence that could be yelled when softly spoken, no upholstered fabric was not covered by plastic, and more than anything I wanted as a kid. I wanted a dog or a cat, a guinea pig, a gerbil, any pet, but my mom was of the school of thought that cleanliness is a few steps better than godliness, and that animals were a potential source of dirt, and that unimaginable poop on the living room floor just, sent her into quivers. So she went to her grave. My mom and dad both passed, but she went to her grave saying, only I'd let my kid have a dog as a kid. As I could be saying, my son the doctor. Like all the Jewish mama-shames, my son who works for the Humane Society didn't quite have that same shame. I left home at 16, went upstate New York to college with my one childhood pet, a fish named Oscar, and left the upstate New York area to come out to San Francisco in the 1970s with my gorgeous 90-pound first dog, Jasper. Went to grad school there and graduated, having spent, how many years in school, working as a laborer, loading paper into printing presses, doing all sorts of just manual jobs to get through school. I came out at that time in the late 70s where the world seemed to have limitless potential, and I just found myself instinctively, without realizing what I was doing, being drawn to those areas of employment, needing a job, where there was a social meaning, there was a social content. So I taught special ed for a few years. I was involved in some oral history projects with elderly people in nursing homes. And eventually, in response to an ad and due to a grant, I was hired by the San Francisco SPCA, and this was back in 1978, to develop a curriculum for school children on animals and the environment. I thought it was cool. I didn't know anything more than that. My dog wasn't neutered at the time. I had no sense of this field, which has happily become my life's work. Pam mentioned my career path. It's either diverse or I can't keep a job. I'm not sure which it is, but I've been an itinerant humaniac for 35 years, working in all sorts of communities and all sorts of jobs. Shelter with animal control, shelter without animal control, pretty much throughout the industry that I call home. That sort of perspective, I think it gives a person a chance to grow opinions about the different facets, the different component parts of our work. Some of you may know there are organizations with all kinds of missions out there. We've got the national organizations, Humane Society of the United States, the American SPCA. They are, from my perspective, largely advocacy organizations, and there is confusion by the public in terms of we are not chapters or affiliates of some mothership, and That confusion can lead to problems. It can lead to problems with the public, and it can lead to problems with our own work. Now, this is not to say that HSUS and ASPCA do not do good work. They do. I'm proud of the 2 years I spent there. But it is simply a fact that unlike other fields, the organizations with the national names are not the motherships. We're not chapters or affiliates. We're separate, distinct organizations. That's confusing to a lot of people. As for the different types of sheltering organizations at the local level, there's a great deal of confusion there as well. Most people, and I've heard this today from folks I've been talking with, most people acknowledge the San Francisco SPCA as one of the pioneers of the no-kill movement. That is absolutely true. However, that does not mean that there is no killing, there is no euthanasia in the city of San Francisco. As Pam said, I started my career at the San Francisco SPCA, left when the decision was made to give up the animal control contract. Not that I think it's wrong. I do not think it's wrong to operate a no-kill shelter. I believe in open admission facilities for myself and the work that I choose to do in this field. So when San Francisco SPCA gave up the Animal Control Services contract, it didn't mean that dying of animals ended. It means it shifted up the street to the San Francisco Department of Animal Care and Control, which is the open admission facility in that city. And San Francisco SPCA said, we will become no-kill. They said no to accepting pit bulls. They said no to accepting most animals with serious medical or behavioral issues. They do a good job doing what they do, but the euthanasia does not end when an organization changes its philosophy or its statement of mission. So there's open admission shelters, there's no-kill shelters, there's rescue groups, there's national organizations which focus on advocacy. There's so many different kinds of organizations that this can be confusing for the general public, especially who might need one type of service and find themselves looking at this rainbow of organizations. But there are many different kinds of organizations can lead to squabbling between us. Jealousy over who got the big news story, jealousy over who got the big grant. But in truth, I really believe we need to embrace those differences and recognize that the differences allow us to complement and help the animals, and don't necessarily mean we need to think of each other in terms of competition. In the final analysis, those of us who work for the animals have far more in common than not. And that's frankly a big part of the reason that many people have come to think of the term no-kill is not especially helpful. It tends to be divisive, and San Francisco SPCA thought of dropping that terminology itself for a number of years. I wish they would. I frankly think the labels divide us, and the fact that they're not going to go away anytime soon is a shame. My observation here that we are not always the most cooperative should come as no surprise to any of us who have been in this field for frankly more than 10 minutes. That meanness and jealousy we've all witnessed, of course, is never us. It's always them that's responsible for that bad behavior. Now, let's face it, commitment runs high in this work, emotions run high, ethical systems run high, resources from dollars to media to volunteers are never enough. It does make sense that we squabble. It even makes sense at a completely biological level. I mean, let's remember, we are animals, and we are, as animals, not the most collegial of species. We're not ants, we're not bees, we're not even dogs or wolves. Our history as a species is more defined by squabbling and outright warfare than it is by collegiality. Over the years, I've seen many examples of purposeful and intentional lacks of cooperation, of real sabotage, more than I'd like to think possible, frankly, among our organizations. If you buy me a beer sometime, I'll be happy to tell you the stories. Some open admission shelters find ways to set up hurdles to working with potential adoption partners, with rescue groups. And that's a failure of cooperation and a denial of all of our missions and our desire to help the animals. Just as bad and just as sad, some rescue groups set up hurdles of working with open admission facilities. Terms like, we saved that dog from death's door at the shelter, does nothing to build bridges between rescue groups and sheltering organizations. And although jealousy and divisiveness exist, so do examples of cooperation. Let me talk about the experience from my own community. Before making a point, though, let me make before making that point, let me make something very, very clear. I'm going to talk a lot about what we do in San Mateo County. It's the work I know best, because it's where I live and spend my days. I am a huge proponent of the fact that your community is different than my community, and every community is different from every other community, and I would bet that from one island to the next, there are differences. Don't let anyone tell you that there is a national model. Don't let anyone say that what we do is what you should do. Listen to what I do. If you think it is of value, filter it through the lens of your culture, your community, and apply it here, because that's where really important what happens. Everything that we do must come from an understanding of what is possible in an individual community. There's nothing replicable in exact same terms. Success can be replicated. The programs have to be tailored to what works in your home. There's a very different approach out there. Ed Sayers, who I would say fortunately is soon to be retiring from the SPCA, has said that no humane society should have an animal control contract, that it is unethical to do that. It's a denial of the mission. That's bull. Equal bull is saying that every humane society must have an animal control contract, or that every group, rescue or shelter, must have a physical shelter. There are very few absolutes in this field. Here's the ones I think exist. We absolutely, all of us, need to care. We absolutely, all of us, need to be creative. We absolutely, all of us, need to know that individually we're not going to accomplish everything that the animals need, and so we need to work in tandem with each other. Those are the absolutes. Beyond that, it's all about individual communities, and every one of them is different from every other individual community. I'm a big believer in the following. Communities get the animal programs they demand. And then on a parallel track, those of us who work in the animal organizations need to help our constituents demand ever more from us. And part of what our constituents need to demand from us is that we figure out how the hell to work together. Now, I have to assume that in this room there are representatives of rescue groups as well as representatives of agencies and organizations which rely on the help of rescue groups. That was something almost unheard of in the San Francisco Bay Area when I started in the late 1970s. Rescue groups now in my community constitute a major part of the horizon. We can't do the work we do without them. Give you an example. My shelter accepts every animal, regardless of species, regardless of age, regardless of health. We've got boa constrictors and iguanas, hawks, birds of prey, and thousands of dogs and cats. We are a completely open-door facility. We do a good job of saving lives, but we still accept animals who aren't going to come out the right way in my shelter for one reason or another. Now, I'm not suggesting that every purebred dog and cat who comes to my shelter is a good candidate for rescue, because they're not. We believe a lot in keeping some of our most highly adoptable animals, and I can tell you that many a 65-pound unruly but totally sweet and goofy pit bull goes home from my shelter because the person who came into my shelter met someone who adopted a purebred Shih Tzu from my shelter. They came in wanting another Shih Tzu and fell in love with a fantastic, absurdly goofy 90-pound dog. We like that. But a good candidate for rescue is, for example, a true story very recently. We had a field-bred yellow lab who was bought by from a breeder by people who had no idea what they were getting into. Lab rescue, we knew, might want this dog who was completely out of control. Our team contacted Lab Rescue. They came down and did an evaluation of their behavior staff with our behavior staff, and they felt they could work with him. Now, our medical team had already determined that the animal had a significant need for dental work. He'd been chewing on rocks in the backyard for the months that he'd been confined out there by that first set of owners. That dental work was well beyond the financial abilities of the rescue group, so we provided the dental. At the same time, we did the neutering. That animal went home with rescue, along with a van load of food and giant crates that we've been collecting for them over the past months. Our staff didn't act dismissively regarding the small size of the rescue group. Our staff recognizes that we have resources and tools and funds that outstrip what rescue's got. But that doesn't mean we look down on them. In fact, the differences in size between us mean probably, and in this case definitely, that there are different tools that each group has separate from the other, and that combination of tools is what saved that dog's life. So we didn't look down on the rescue group, and nor did the rescue group look at us as the 900-pound gorilla that they were saving that dog from death's door. They recognize our role as an open mission is to accept everything. They recognize that the thousands of animals we save a year far outstrip what they can do in terms of numbers. But if each individual life counts, which I know we in this room all believe it does, that they can help that one life where we might not have been able to, that's the success. Now, would that dog have been placed had he stayed in our care? We don't know. He didn't stay in our care. But we knew that he wasn't at risk of being euthanized at that moment. We knew that rescue was the right place to go. Our staff, knowing what we're good at, and knowing that his needs in our facility were not a best match, reached out to a partner. We have any number of collaborative relationships like this in place, and I hope those exist here on these islands. For example, we don't have a test, trap, neuter, release program at the Peninsula Humane Society. We don't need to. There are several freestanding nonprofits organizations which do a fantastic job, well-established TTNR programs. So we don't need to establish one, but we do work with them. We've gotten them some grant monies over the years. We let them have our auditorium for the public presentations they need. We produce brochures in tandem with them. We provide them no-cost and low-cost sterilization, vaccination services as partners. There's a relatively new group in town with a very clever name of 10th Life Foundation. You know how cats have 9 lives? I think it's very cute, I really do. And they're filling a somewhat unique niche in my community, finding safe placement for feral cats in barns and on ranches throughout our community. So this past spring, summer, during kitten season, we all know what kitten season is, don't we? So this past season, during kitten season, we had a pair of underage feral kittens. One of them possibly could have been socialized by our foster care providers. The other one was too far gone for our skill sets of our volunteers. But regardless, all of our foster families were full at that moment. It was the height of the season. 10th Life contacted us, saying that they had a backyard placement for 2 kittens. There were 2 kittens with people who knew what they were getting into and who would provide care, medical attention, shelter, and would provide some degree of socialization as possible. So we contacted them. They agreed that these were the 2 right kittens. One broke with ringworm, the other broke with URI before they were going to go home. That could have easily led to a failure and the death of those animals. We provided the initial treatment for the ringworm. We provided the initial treatment for the URI. We provided all follow-up medical care necessary. They found the foster families that would socialize and provide the long-gone care for those animals until they were healthy enough to go into the backyard. 2 organizations working together to save 2 little cats' lives. That's what we need to be doing. Now let me take a minute or 2 here to just turn at an angle that might not make immediate sense, but something I want to try. Do you all remember the name T.S. Eliot? They all had to read his indecipherable poetry in junior high school. He was the guy who stopped using capital letters in his poetry, making the confusing art of poetry even more confusing. Well, let's go that route. Let's get rid of the capital letters just for a moment in H for humane and the capital S in society. And let's instead think of the Hawaiian, still a capital, lowercase h, humane, lowercase s, society. What I'm trying to say is, rather than the Hawaiian Humane Society being, for this moment, an organization, let it be all of you in Hawaii who choose to work together to create the most humane society possible here in the islands. I mean, what would that look like? That would look like each of you caring about and respecting the animals, which I do believe is the case. It would also mean each of you caring about and respecting each other, knowing that each of you was in it for the same reason, never questioning or doubting that they don't care, because you respect and know that as a fact you all care. It's like the phrase, it takes a village. It's like everyone working together for a common cause, the cause of saving lives. I mean, that's really what it's about, isn't it? Collaboration, cooperation, mutual respect with the common goal of helping the animals. So that's it. What's in the best interest of the animals? And that's the best segue I can think of to talk about how do we measure success. How do we measure that if we all work together, we are actually succeeding in helping the animals? Now, point of privilege from the podium here is I start from the point that every effort I think our field has made to set standards and to establish measurements, I think every single one of those systems stinks. I don't think we've been very good at figuring out how to measure success. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. True story. A dog was surrendered by his owner in a neighboring county to a Humane Society. That Humane Society transferred that dog to a rescue group. That rescue group transferred that dog to an adoption center in another county. The dog was adopted and quickly ran away and showed up stray at the Peninsula Humane Society. One dog, 4 organizations. When the dog came to my organization, the prior 3 had not done what they should have done to the microchip. So it showed up that that dog had still the original owner, who is who we called. You can imagine how thrilled he was to find out that we had his dog. This is not someone that ended up, I think, as a donor to any Humane Society. So in the end, what happened? The guy was willing to take the dog back. We didn't know the hoops of fire this dog had been made to jump through at that time. So a dog who wasn't wanted ended up in the hands of the person who didn't want him. That's the facts. What's the statistics? Live release from the first organization to which he was surrendered, live release to the rescue group to which he was transferred, live release to the adoption agency, which took him and found him a home, which didn't last. And if we chose to go by the same set of statistics, a live release from my organization, the Peninsula Humane Society. That's 4 successes with one dog who ended up back where he started from and wasn't wanted. That is the methodology in place in most shelters. And when you read X percentage live release rate in most shelters, that's what we're talking about. It's shocking to me, I recently met with the directors of one of the shelters involved in this, one of the shelters who is a major proponent of this kind of statistic keeping, and explained the story as a way of illustrating my concerns, and their response, they thought it was just fine. Because what has begun to happen in shelters is we've begun to take a look at the success measured on what we do, not the success measured on the animals affected. And we need not to do that. Cats are cats. And the death of a cat matters whether that cat is hissing or purring when he's injected with overdose of barbiturates. We need to be honest about what we're doing. And we know what success is, don't we? I mean, I do. Success is my dog, Archie. Archie is 85 pounds, looks like a giant woolly mammoth. He was a completely abused dog who came into my shelter a few months. Success is my cat, Simus. He's a red tabby, named after my grandmother's favorite dish, which was carrots and sweet potatoes. Simus was a feral kitten who was caught in a trap. Archie is one of my 2 dogs, Simus one of my 4 cats. We're over breed limit in my community. Those 6 dogs and cats, along with my lizard, didgeridoo, and my wife, make up our home. Every night, almost every night, at some point or the other, I see Archie, my 85-pound dog, cleaning and grooming the ears and head of Simus, my 11-pound cat. That is success. We measure success of the Peninsula Humane Society by actual changes, not by made-up live release rate stuff. The earliest statistics we've got go back to 1970. My organization was founded in '51. We don't know where those first 20 years of data went. But in 1970, the Peninsula Humane Society euthanized 37,680 dogs and cats. Last year, 2011, we go by calendar years, last year we euthanized 2,121 dogs and cats. 37,680 animals euthanized in 1970 compared to 2,121 euthanized last year. That's a drop in euthanasia of over 94%. That's success, I think. 1970, the year of the first stats, we opened our first low-cost spay-neuter clinic, open to the public. And in both good years and bad years, it has remained open. In fact, in recent years, we've expanded it to free mobile spay-neuter. And I'm talking to some folks at the Hawaiian Humane Society. We now have a program we call the Ball Bounty, where we actually give you money to let us neuter your animal. A very successful program. It's helped with overpopulation of pit bulls for a number of years. We're now redirecting into chihuahuas, which is what our real crisis is. Yes, the Ball Bounty. In the first 5 years of opening our spay-neuter clinic, euthanasia dropped from 37,680 to 16,734. In 5 years, it dropped by 50%. In the next 5 years, it dropped from 16,000 plus to 8,000 plus. Another drop in euthanasia. It can be done. Here's another way of looking at this. Back in 1970s, staff at the San Francisco SPCA, the Oakland SPCA, the Peninsula Humane Society, the Marin Humane Society, all the open-door facilities in the San Francisco Bay Area, staff would go to work in the morning. They would euthanize dogs and cats for 4 hours. They would take a lunch break. They would euthanize dogs and cats for 4 hours, and they would go home. That was a day's work in the 1970s. It's not that long ago. Back then, the method of euthanasia was to open a giant metal box and shove as many dogs and cats in as you could, turn a switch which would pull the air out as quickly as possible. Thought to be the humane method of euthanasia, made illegal in California, fortunately, in 1979. The method wasn't the problem. The method was a symptom of the quantity of animals that needed to die because there was nothing else to be done for them. The issue is addressable because, again, we are now 94% better, but 2,121 animals euthanized in my shelter last year, still too many. We know that. We're on target now, we think, to reduce that by another 4% this year. And the important thing is there's no spin here. Feral cats are wildlife and their death doesn't count. I've heard that from shelters. Pit bulls don't count. They're too wild. We can't adopt them. I've heard that from shelters. 7-year-old animals are too old to place. I've heard that from shelters. Those numbers include feral cats, pit bulls, and dogs and cats 10, 12, 13, 15 years old. Now, there's no spin unless one lies. I'm not lying. This is what my community has been able to accomplish. And as I said before, if this is a room full of people who work at rescue groups, at humane societies, at pet stores that care about the animals in the community, if it's a room full of breeders who all chose to give up a Saturday to come here, you can accomplish something comparable through your own means and your own methods in this community. I mean, what would it be like if you all worked in tandem here? What would it be like if the rescue group took animals from the Hawaiian Humane Society, animals that might not otherwise be placed through the Hawaiian Humane Society? That's how it works in my community. What about applying some of that here to your beautiful home? It's worked in California. We're different places, but some things like that can work here. Because the truth of the matter is, the enemy we need to fight is not each other. The enemy we need to fight is abuse, overpopulation, the lack of caring and concern. The common complaint in our work is that there's a lack of resources, and that's at the core of our problems and challenges. If we had more, we could accomplish more, and that's certainly true to a certain degree, but rather than looking at resources entirely as dollars, if we look at resources to include cooperation and collaboration, then maybe we do have more than we realize. But let's pause for a moment and talk about money. I mean, this is something I hear when I talk at shelters. My budget at the Peninsula Humane Society and SPCA this year is $12.4 million. That's what it will cost us to operate our organization this year. Some people think of spending money as an evil in this work. Well, truth be told, I employ 6 veterinarians, 16 veterinary technicians, 18 officers. I've got to pay salaries, I've got to keep the lights on, I've got to put gas in the vehicles. My hat's off to those people who run organizations on a shoestring. But I've got 3 campuses, 112 employees. I've got a budget like any business, and it's not bad to think of what we do as a business. We are non-profit businesses. Non-profit doesn't mean that we don't spend money. It simply means we don't have stockholders and owners to split the profit. We've got bills to pay, and we need not to feel guilty when we talk to the public about needing financial support, and we don't need to accuse each other of being less caring when we pay salaries. The job we do is done by finding resources, finding our partners, and telling the story truthfully and honestly, not by making it up. If it were simple, as the cliche goes, anyone could do it. It's not simple. We know that. But the truth of the matter is, that's what you signed on for when you took these jobs. So why do we do this? Why do we spend years pushing boulders up big hills? What keeps us going? Are we crazy?
Yes.
Yes. Absolutely. And probably there's an adrenaline rush of always feeling like we're valued and we've got something to do, and God love it, we're never bored, and that's a good thing. I think part of the reason we do it is the simple one. We love animals. We really do love animals. Every one of us in this room loves animals. So let me close my comments by telling you or reading to you something about that. I should take a segue moment here and say one of my favorite things I've been able to do over the last few years is I've developed a subspecialty. I teach a class at one of our local universities on animals and American literature. We look at Native American stories. We look at, one of my favorite things, a contrast and compare. You probably remember that from Lit 101, those of you who have those classes. We contrast and compare the little Chihuahua in Legally Blonde with Moby Dick. Think about it. The dog today as confidant, the animal back then is the face of a mean-spirited God or a mindless nature. It says a lot about how we move forward in our perception of animals, and frankly, the students have a good time and I have a good time. Well, every time I teach the class, I also try to turn them on to poetry, an art form that I think is sadly dying despite rap. So, let me close my comments by reading to you a poem. It's by one of my favorite writers, Wendell Berry. And I think it speaks to why we all are here, because we all feel whole with and around the animals. It's called The Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the wildness of the world, and I am free. Mahalo. Thank you. I'm told by Pam that if any of you have questions, I've got time to address them. So, do you have a question for me? Yeah.
Just a personal question on the yellow lab that you talked about that was out of control. Was that dog named Luca? He came from Millbrae?
One of our volunteers is also a Hawaiian Humane Society volunteer.
Can I just tell a story about that dog real quick,
Please.
if I may? I almost hit that dog with my car over there because he lived right down the street from my apartment there. And I slammed on the brakes and I opened my car door. It was a 2-year-old yellow lab that was very happy but never been trained, never been exercised. Put him in my car, drove him down to the fire department down the street to see if there was any way we could get him to get a microchip scan. And I went driving up and down that street, and finally I saw people looking around, and I said, by any chance did you people lose a dog? And they said yes. I talked with the owners. They bought the dog as a puppy for their little boy. The boy was not interested. They never spent time with this dog. They had a neighbor who, the dog had a prong collar and an electric shock collar, in addition to his regular collar. And I was just gobsmacked to see this. And I was talking to them. They were nice people, but completely clueless. Their neighbor got the leash and was pulling and pulling and pulling on this dog's neck because he just wanted to run and play. And I told him I almost hit the dog. He jumped the fence, and they said, well, we have to get rid of it. And I said, have you looked into the Peninsula Humane Society training classes? And they said, well, we don't have time for that. And it just was astounding that these people got this dog for their son without doing any homework. They didn't know the breed. It was a beautiful, wonderful dog. And I'm just glad to hear that has a second chance now.
Happy endings, and made possible by, in addition to 2 groups, our organization and rescue group, by some volunteer who cared enough herself to do the right thing. I mean, like I said, it takes a village. It does. Thank you. Other question? Yeah.
Yes, at your open shelter, and you talked about how you've decreased the amount of euthanasia,
Yes, sir.
Which is very commendable, of course. I'm wondering, do you distinguish between those dogs that are just, reach their old age and can't get up and around, and, it's just that time, quality of life being what it is. Do you make any distinguish between those that are like, that just, it's just that time, versus those dogs that just don't have a home or for whatever?
It's a great question, and it speaks again to what do the statistics really tell us, what do the statistics really mean. So 2 answers, 2 parts to the question. One of the things my shelter believes very much is one of our roles in the community is to offer euthanasia for people who love a pet and who choose to have an animal, like you just described, put to sleep by us. We offer that service at all of my facilities to the community. Those dogs, someone's beloved cat or dog, 15 years old, brought to us, obviously a despondent owner, obviously a dog or cat at the end of a comfortable stage of his life, those deaths we do not count in our statistics. When we get a 14-year-old dog in stray, which happens, I'll never forget this, my first day in the job, 1978, we went on a ride-along with officers in Golden Gate Park, and there was an ancient German Shepherd mutt tied to a tree with a note on him saying he needs to be put to sleep. Well, he should have been brought to the shelter. But when we get that dog's death does count into 2,121 lives. We don't feel that that's a death that doesn't matter. We feel it's a death that is easier for us to offer. There's not a chance for that dog, but that's a failure. It's a failure someplace. It's a failure of that person for not doing the right thing. And so we count that death as a failure. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Are you aware of any collaborations with nature centers? I work for a local nature center, and we try to incorporate humane education, including pets, in our education programs.
I think that's great. I think that's great. And the reality is in my organization, we kind of are a nature center in that among the things we do is we take care of the wildlife for the community. In fact, I mentioned this yesterday, we're now opening a new facility. We're working on another facility which will all be about wildlife and education. So we sort of build our own nature center, as well as you will. But when I ran the Arizona Humane Society, which was 8 years ending in 2002, we had collaborations with Phoenix Zoo, Liberty Wildlife, and 2 other smaller education centers whose names I don't recall, and worked our educators with their educators about incorporating their dog and cat message, because we were at Arizona Humane dog and cat shelter only, incorporating the dog and cat message in theirs, and them helping us bring the bird message and the conservation message into ours. I think it's all about all of us working together, including, frankly, with Sierra Club and Audubon and those groups which focus almost entirely on the natural world, not the animals who live in those natural world as well. Thank you. Other last question before I head all down? Yes, I'm sorry.
I'd like to go from the emotional to the pragmatic.
Please.
I'd like to, about money. You said that you had open spay neuter. Is that all dogs and cats, and maybe even rabbits, or is that just cats?
So we spay and neuter all dogs, all cats, and all rabbits that we adopt. We have low-cost spay and neuter for all dogs, all cats, and all rabbits from the public at our standing facility, and we have free spay neuter for cats, rabbits, and dogs at our mobile facility. And now, as I said earlier, we'll give you $20 if your dog happens to be a Chihuahua.
How do you find
We call that, by the way, going a little nuts, which I really How do we fundraise?
How do you fund the free part? I'm interested because I get a lot of phone calls about spay neutering people who can't even afford the low-cost spay neuter certificates.
Right.
Drives them crazy, drives me crazy, that they can't even buy that because
You know, we afford it, but I don't know that the answer is going to help you here. It's a different community. We have a fantastic, wonderful major donor whose last name happens to be Getty, who underwrites our mobile spay neuter clinic. But the reason that Ms. Getty came to us was because she saw the work that we were doing and said, I'd like to help you do some more. Every organization has to pick its priorities. They do. One of the hardest things about operating a not-for-profit is we want to do everything, and none of us can. When I got to the Peninsula Humane Society 10 years ago, 11 years ago now, I said, this organization is the first to open a public spay neuter clinic of any humane society as far as we know in the country. Our numbers were already close down to what I've reported they've been. We made spay neuter our priority. It is probably our biggest goal for fundraising. So we are very successful in our direct mail campaigns to the general public about spay neuter. We go to our major donors about spay neuter, and we draw general income that comes in, and we subsidize our spay neuter. But again, that's what works in my community. If it could work here, maybe it could work as a goal 10 years out. Let's aspire to that. But I don't want anyone to think, as I said, that what we're able to do in my community is instantly replicable here, just like many of the wonderful things that I see happening here. I don't know how we would pull it off at home for each individuals. Thank you all, and I'll be around if you have other questions I didn't get to. I really appreciate it.